Good morning, students. Let's come to the second part of Akbar. I'm going to begin with the Mansabdari system again. Those who are not present in today's class or those who have not heard my previous video recording will please listen to this system very carefully. Now, the Mansabdari system. The term Mansab actually means office or rank, and a Mansabdar is a holder of a rank in the administration. The civil and military administration of the country was based on the Mansabdari system introduced by Akbar, and it was the most important system in Akbar's administration. The vast Mughal Empire had been created with the help of a strong army, and it could only be maintained and controlled with the help of a powerful army and an efficient administration. So, the Mughal administration, which was essentially a military one, was entirely based on this Mansabdari system. Now, what were the features of this system? Under this system, every official in the imperial service was given a rank or a mansab, and this rank depended on the nature and importance of the job. The lowest rank was that of a mansabdar in charge of 10 horsemen, while the highest mansabdar was an officer maintaining 7,000 horsemen. The higher mansabs were reserved for the members of the royal family. Is that clear? The second point is that the mansabdars were appointed, promoted, and dismissed by the emperor himself. The mansabdars were given a salary in accordance with their rank. They were later paid in the form of jagirs also. The mansabdars who performed very well were gifted jagirs and became jagirdars. They were entitled to a fixed amount of revenue from the jagir as salary for themselves and their troops. With the help of that money, they used to maintain the troops. A mansab or rank was not hereditary. After the death of the mansabdars, the jagir was reverted to the king, who granted it to someone else according to his wishes. The mansabdars did not have any authority or responsibility of administering the jagir. The system of branding horses and maintaining a descriptive roll of soldiers was adopted by Akbar. Akbar also maintained a standing army. The cavalry was the most important branch of the Mughal army. The troops were mainly supplied by the Mansabdars. The emperor also directly recruited and maintained a battalion of loyal and trusted soldiers. He himself did this. He also maintained a corps of royal bodyguards and armed palace guards, a large number of war elephants, and a well organized artillery. That was his Mansabdari system. It was entirely, uh, you can say, an efficient military system of Akbar. Now let's come to the revenue system of Akbar. Land was the main source of revenue. Akbar adopted the basic structure of Shershah's revenue system. He introduced some important reforms with the help of Raja Todarmal, the brilliant revenue minister. Todarmal introduced a land revenue system known as the Todarmal's Bandobast. Now, what were the features of this revenue system? Point 1. Land was surveyed and measured with a bamboo zarib joined together with iron rings instead of ropes, which were used earlier. Second point, the land was grouped into four categories depending on whether it was regularly or occasionally cultivated. It was classified further into good, average, and bad categories. Third point, the average produce and the average price over the past 10 years was calculated. Okay? The revenue was calculated on the basis of this average. One third of the average produce was the king's share. It could be paid in cash or kind, though cash was preferred. Next point, the revenue officers were instructed to treat the farmers very, very well, to be very kind towards them, not at all harsh. Next point, loans which could be paid back in easy installments were given to the farmers to buy seeds, cattle, and implements. And the last point is, if the crops failed due to a natural calamity like famine or flood, the state granted remission of revenue. So Akbar's revenue system worked very successfully, and the state was assured of a fixed and steady source of income. Now, trade. Trade was another source of revenue, though much less compared to that obtained from land. Internal and external trade was encouraged by Akbar, and the main items of export were textiles, spices, indigo, and saltpeter. India traded with China, Central Asia, and Europe, and it was during this time that the Portuguese established trade centers on the west coast of India. Akbar also issued a gold coin called mohar, which was made of pure gold. Okay, and the gold coins were of a standard weight. Of course, silver and copper coins were also used. Now let's come to Akbar's religious policy. Akbar's great desire was to unite the diverse races in India into one nation where everyone would enjoy equal status. So, he adopted certain policies to transform the Islamic state into a secular state. Throughout his rule, Akbar followed a policy of religious tolerance and won the respect, affection, and support of his Hindu subjects in general and the Rajputs in particular. Akbar abolished the jizya or poll tax and also the pilgrim tax. The jizya tax had been imposed by earlier Muslim rulers on all non Muslim subjects only, so it was greatly resented by the Hindus. The pilgrim tax had been imposed by earlier rulers on Hindus visiting places of pilgrimage. Akbar abolished both these taxes. Hindus were allowed to build temples, celebrate festivals, and worship freely. He allowed his Rajput wives to celebrate festivals such as Holi and Diwali, and himself took part in the celebrations. He gave high posts to talented and competent Hindus like Raja Todarmal, Raja Birbal, Raja Bhagwan Das, who was the brother of Jodhabai, and Birbal was his constant companion and trusted friend. He also gave a high post to Raja Man Singh. He married Rajput princesses and allowed them freedom of worship. He also had wives from the other religions, like he had a Christian wife, he had a Parsi wife, etc. He gave land grants to all persons irrespective of their religious faith. In 1575, Akbar built the Ibadat Khana or the Hall of Prayer at his new capital Fatehpur Sikri for discussions on religious matters. He then invited scholars, philosophers, priests, missionaries, and religious leaders to hold discussions on religion. Like Muslim clerics, Hindu scholars, Buddhist and Jain monks, Parsi priests, Christian missionaries, etc., assembled in the Ibadat Khana and explained the principles and teachings of their respective religions. And in 1579, Akbar issued a declaration called Mazhar, which gave him the power to choose between different interpretations of the Islamic law. This helped him to consolidate his power with respect to multiple interpreters of law in his kingdom. Now let's talk about Akbar's own religion, that is Din-e-Ilahi. Akbar believed strongly in the principle of Sulekul or universal peace or peace with all. He found elements of virtue and divine truth in every religion and a basic unity in different faiths. And based on his understanding and appreciation of various religions, in 1582, Akbar announced the formation of a new religious order which he called Din-e-Ilahi or Divine Faith. The Din-e-Ilahi was a combination of the religious ideas of the major religions. The objective was to establish a religious order which would be acceptable to the Hindus, to the Muslims, and other communities, and to promote universal brotherhood and national unity. The main features of this religion were a belief in one God and recognition of the emperor as God's representative on earth. The Din-e-Ilahi was more like a code of moral conduct. There were no sacred books, no priestly classes, no places of worship, and no rituals. And Akbar never forced anyone to convert to this new faith. So it did not become popular outside his court. Even among his courtiers, his Rajput friends Raja Man Singh and Raja Bhagwan Das refused to join the Din-e-Ilahi. Birbal was the only Hindu courtier to accept it. So, the Din-e-Ilahi came to an end with Akbar's death. Now let's talk about Akbar's 9 gems. Akbar's court was adorned by a galaxy of illustrious men known as the 9 gems or the Navratnas. Remember another ruler having Navratnas in his court? Do you remember that? Can you tell me? It was one of the Gupta rulers. Think about him. And Akbar was the second ruler who had Navratnas in his court. Okay, it was Chandragupta II who had Navratnas in his court. So Akbar's famous 9 gems were Abul Fazl, who was a scholar, a historian, and author of Akbarnama and Aini Akbari. Then it was Faizi, Persian poet, laureate, and philosopher. Abdul Rahim Khan, Khani Khanan, a Hindu poet and composer of dohas. Tansen was a great singer and musician of extraordinary talent. There was Todarmal, Raja Todarmal, Akbar's brilliant revenue minister. Raja Birbal, Akbar's constant companion, renowned for his intelligence and sharp wit. There was Raja Man Singh, a great military commander and trusted advisor of Akbar. There was Fakir Azauddin, a mystic and advisor of Akbar. And finally, Mullado Piazza, a scholar known for his ready wit. So, concluding the chapter, I would like to say that Akbar was the representative of the golden age of the Mughal Empire. He laid the foundation of a secular national state based on the principles of religious tolerance, universal brotherhood, and political unity. Okay, he laid the foundation of a secular national state. Remember that, secular national state, which was based on the principles of religious tolerance, universal brotherhood, and political unity. So I'm concluding this chapter here. I hope it is very clear to you all, children. Please read the chapter thoroughly, and the question answers will be given in the classroom. Thank you.